They dedicated more intelligence assets to tracking him than to any other Allied commander. They pored over his movements, convinced that wherever he showed up, the real blow would fall. This is the story of George S. Patton, and how one man's speed, aggression, and uncanny grasp of German operational thinking kept the Nazi high command off balance from North Africa to the Ardennes. In the spring of 1944, a secure conference room in Berlin was cluttered with photographs, intercepts, and aerial reconnaissance. But the target wasn't a division or a convoy. It was one man, Lieutenant General George S. Patton. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt and his staff treated every piece of information about Patton's whereabouts as top priority. They had faced Britain's Bernard Montgomery and America's Omar Bradley, but none unnerved them like Patton. Their obsession dated back to November 1942, when Allied forces stormed ashore in Operation Torch. Patton led the Western Task Force, landing 35,000 U.S. troops on Morocco's Atlantic coast. While the American army was famed for deliberate, set-piece battles supported by overwhelming firepower, Patton shattered that stereotype. Within 72 hours, he had seized Casablanca and forced a French garrison to capitulate. German commanders, including Field Marshal Albert Kesselring in the Mediterranean, were stunned by Patton's lightning advance. Reports poured in. This American general moved too fast, took risks no one expected, and seemed to think like a German. They dug into his past. Patton had spent years poring over German military theory in the original language, walking the Somme battlefields of World War I, studying the very tactics that had nearly crushed France in 1914 and 1918. He absorbed their doctrines until he could out-blitzkrieg them. In February 1943, at the Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, German panzers under Erwin Rommel shattered novice American divisions, sending them fleeing in disarray. It was the U.S. Army's worst defeat of the war, and the Allies wondered if they could ever stop Rommel's armored spearheads. Into that breach stepped Patton. In early March, he took command of the battered II Corps. Within 2 weeks, he had restored discipline, rebuilt morale, and transformed those same troops into an offensive force. Patrols probed German lines with a ferocity their commanders had not seen before. In his diary, Rommel admitted that American forces had become far more dangerous, not because they had more tanks or fresh divisions, but because Patton was behind them. By July 1943, when the Allies landed on Sicily, the plan was for Montgomery's British Eighth Army to advance up the eastern coast, while Patton's Seventh Army secured the western flank. Patton ignored the script. His columns raced across Sicily like panzers on a campaign, covering more ground in days than most armies managed in weeks. German troops, scrambling to evacuate across the Strait of Messina, found their escape routes threatened. What they expected to be a leisurely withdrawal became a desperate scramble under Patton's relentless hammer blows. When he reached Messina, he arrived before Montgomery, and he had started several miles farther west. German after-action reports gushed with a mixture of admiration and dread. "He fights like a panzer commander," one officer wrote. "He seizes every opportunity before defenders can react." That blatant embrace of German-style tactics was exactly what terrified them. But at the height of his Sicilian success, Patton nearly derailed his career. Touring casualty and evacuation hospitals in August, he encountered soldiers suffering from battle fatigue. In what he saw as cowardice, he slapped 2 men and even brandished his pistol at one. Word reached General Eisenhower, who publicly reprimanded Patton and quietly prepared to relieve him of command. Newspapers called for his ouster. Congressmen demanded his head. German intelligence savored the scandal, certain the Allies would discard their most dangerous general. But Eisenhower kept Patton in place, though reassigned him to England, away from any front line. That very move played into Allied hands. In southern England, Patton became the figurehead of the 1st United States Army Group, a vast force that existed only on paper. Inflatable tanks, plywood command posts, phony radio traffic, all crafted to deceive German spies. They knew Patton was in the south. They knew he wasn't leading the obvious units massing at Portsmouth and Plymouth, so they concluded he must command the main invasion. They put their best armies opposite the Pas-de-Calais, waiting for the attack that never came. On June 6, 1944, the real invasion struck Normandy, 150 miles west of their expectations. Von Rundstedt wanted to unleash his panzer reserves immediately to smash the beachhead, but Hitler and his staff hesitated, convinced Normandy was a feint designed to lure them away from Pas-de-Calais. For 6 critical weeks, the armored divisions that might have rolled across Omaha or Utah lay idle, pinned near Calais by fear of Patton's Phantom Army. On August 1st, Patton finally received a real command. 3rd Army. He shipped across the Channel and plunged into Normandy fighting. In the first 2 weeks, 3rd Army advanced farther than any Allied force had managed in the previous 2 months. Patton ripped a path through Brittany, then wheeled east toward Paris. German units that had held static lines now found Americans behind them, severing supply roads and forcing hasty retreats. Communications collapsed. Commanders lost track of their own front lines. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, who had succeeded von Rundstedt, sent frantic dispatches warning Berlin that Patton's columns were everywhere at once. Mid-August brought the Falaise Pocket, the chance to trap hundreds of thousands of German soldiers. As British, Canadian, and Polish armies squeezed from the north and Patton pressed from the south, the noose tightened. Units inside Falaise tried to flee on foot. Officers could not rally their men. When the gap finally closed, more than 50,000 Germans were taken prisoner, and the remnants of their once formidable armor, artillery, and transport lay in ruins. Survivors would later confess they had never felt more helpless. No time to prepare defenses, no way to break out of Patton's encirclement. After the war, Allied interrogators asked captured German generals which enemy commander they respected or feared most. Montgomery was methodical and predictable. Bradley was solid but cautious. But Patton, unpredictable, brutally aggressive, dangerous. Von Rundstedt called him the Allied general we most feared. Fritz Bayerlein of the Panzer Lehr Division said Patton fought like a German panzer leader, exploiting every weakness before defenders could react. In December 1944, Hitler launched his final gamble. The Ardennes Offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. Caught by surprise, the Americans fell back, and the 101st Airborne Division was surrounded at Bastogne. Eisenhower convened an emergency staff meeting at Verdun. Most generals demanded weeks to organize a counterstroke. Patton said he could strike back in 48 hours. His critics scoffed. You couldn't redeploy an entire army on icy roads in 2 days. Yet Patton had anticipated a German drive through the Ardennes, and his intelligence officer, Oskar Koch, had prepared contingency plans. On December 26th, 3rd Army pivoted 90 degrees and smashed into the southern flank of the Bulge. Bastogne was relieved that evening. The German offensive faltered and died. German officers later agreed their fatal mistake was underestimating Patton's speed. From Tunisia to the Ardennes, he never gave them a moment's rest. He embodied the blitzkrieg principles they had pioneered: rapid maneuver, relentless aggression, exploitation of enemy weakness, and he understood those doctrines better than many of his adversaries. Why did the Germans fear Patton more than any other Allied leader? Because he fought their way. He grasped that war was not a slow grind, but a sudden shock, an art they believed belonged to them alone. Patton took calculated risks, seized fleeting opportunities, and always moved faster than the enemy could recover. He defied doctrine, outran logistics, and rewrote the rules of engagement on every battlefield he touched. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt summed it up. Patton was the supreme master of mobile warfare, the one general we truly feared. From the sands of North Africa to the Ardennes snow, George S. Patton earned that fear battle by battle, victory by victory, proving that the best defense is a ferocious offense, and that sometimes you have to fight like the enemy to beat him. If you'd like more stories like this, please like and subscribe.